And then Bridie are here with us. Okay, we're recording, so we can go.
Hi, everybody. We're going to get started. That's Norm Bond for everybody who's interested. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the 345 session. I'm Meg Benke. I'm a professor at SUNY Empire State College. I coordinated a program in adult learning, also a program in learning and ed tech, and then I also teach in our EDD program. But it's my pleasure today to introduce colleagues of Alex and myself who we met pre-COVID. I had the pleasure to meet these colleagues in Ireland when I was there on a Fulbright, and brought them back to the US to do some other things and introduce them to Alex pre-COVID. And we've established collaborative relationships going back and forth through this time, and working together on both online education and prior learning assessment. It's my pleasure to introduce Carina Ginty, who is the director of a pretty major project that's going on in Ireland right now. There are 7 institutions that have received money from the European Union to develop digital infrastructure, student supports, and also faculty supports in Ireland's technological university system. And I'm also pleased to introduce Bridie Killoran, who is working with another project that is called employability. What is it?
Higher Ed 4.0.
Higher Ed 4.0, which is a really innovative program that links together career planning and placement type student supports with employer supports and prior learning assessment. They both work at the Atlantic Technological University, which they'll tell you more about, and work there with the online and student support areas and these multi-funded projects. I'll tell you the number of millions, but it would be too much for us to even think about in our lovely state system. I also wanted to say yesterday, Alex said, asked who was from the farthest away from here, and Norm tried to claim that that thing. I will tell you, he's only 2,483 miles away, and it's all by land. These women came 3,050 miles over sea. Okay, here they are.
Share this. All right. Is that all right? And now, yeah.
3 dots right there, and then presenter.
Okay, perfect. Okay, we'll get rid of this. Okay, so lovely to meet you all. And my name is Carina Ginty, and thank you so much, Meg. There's Meg. Thank you so much, Meg, for the wonderful introduction. And thank you so much, Alex, for inviting us to be here with you today to share the story of the work going on in Atlantic Technological University. So I'm not sure if I'm too close. So we'll be taking you through the story over the next hour, and we do have a paddle board in the chat where we will be asking some questions, and there is some interaction along the way. But so we'll begin. Something forward. Oh yeah, there we go. So Bridie Killoran is here. Bridie, you want to introduce yourself? Yeah.
So yeah, good afternoon, everybody. And I suppose just to really say special thank you to Alex. You've been absolutely wonderful and so collaborative and so kind of nice in inviting us here. And everybody is supposed to make us really welcome and friendly. Even the shamrocks at reception, we're so thoughtful. Thank you, Alex. And as I say, Meg as well has been we've learned so much from you and what you've been doing here with SUNY, and just to say thanks, for that.
Okay. So we're going to take you through a bit of a story over the next hour, and we'll tell you a little bit about our university. And we're pretty new, actually, even though we've been around in our original institute, GMIT, for over, well, not us working there, but it is 50 years old actually this year, GMIT. But we'll tell you about the Atlantic Technological University and this innovation project. So there's a number of areas we're going to look at. You'll get an opportunity then after this session to delve in and explore the platform, and Bridie will talk about a pilot initiative that is happening with SUNY and through connections with Meg, and we'll be delighted to share that with you as well. So, okay, so who we are. So Atlantic Technological University, if you're familiar with the map of Ireland, we're taking over, I suppose, the west and northwest of Ireland. You'll see all the little orange dots. They're our campuses. So we start from Galway in the west of Ireland, Galway City, if you're familiar, and it goes all the way up to the north to Donegal, to Letterkenny. So we are the second largest university now in Ireland, as a result of the merger of our 3 institutes of technology, which was originally called GMIT, IT Sligo, and Letterkenny IT. So we would also be, I suppose, very strong in the area of the intake of school leavers. So for you in SUNY, you're very well established in the lifelong learner space and the flexible and online learners. We're more, I suppose, established in the area of looking after the school leavers. But certainly in recent years, and probably more so in the last 5 to 10 years, we've been putting more of an emphasis on focusing on flexible and online learners. And some of the initiatives that we're talking to you about today, you'll see how we're trying to drive engagement and support the transition into higher ed for different cohorts. So other points there, 9 research centres, 20,000 students. Now, that's a lot for us. I know in SUNY you have a lot more students, but within our country of Ireland, we would be seen as, I suppose, the second largest. And I suppose for us as well, we're regionally dispersed, but we're also regionally focused. So we're very focused on meeting the needs of such a wide range of stakeholders in our region and driving engagement into higher ed. So these are a couple of images, different places where, so this is the campus that Bridie and I are in Galway City, right here in the centre. And then right up here above, then you'll have the Donegal campus, another beautiful part of Ireland out in Connemara as well, if you're familiar with Connemara, if you've been there. Another campus in Galway we have for creative arts and media. We have an agricultural campus as well with Mount Bellew, and we have Mayo as well. A lot of the health science and nursing programs take place there. And then up in Sligo as well has such a wide variety of programs and very well known for their online degree programs. You may be familiar with Sligo for many years. Okay, so next, so what about the drivers and where has this all come about and why we're here today to chat to you about this project? So there is policy drivers that have been driving development for us. And in more recent years, there has been a huge investment in higher education under this area called Human Capital Initiative, HCI. So Bridie and I were part of a team that co-developed this whole proposal that you'll hear about today. And this Human Capital Initiative, it's like an innovation grant or an innovation fund through government. It's worth €12 million. And it's very much aligned with what's happening in the technological university sector, the change and transition that's happening with colleges merging together, supporting that innovation and change and transition, and focus very much on a regional mission and how we're aligning better with enterprise and how we're supporting such a wide range of stakeholders coming in from industry, from further ed, and from people seeking to get back into the workplace or returning into higher education. So there's a very strong focus on employability in the sector in Ireland, and that's what has driven our engagement in reinventing and redesigning a lot of our programs. So in addition to that, you'll see more emphasis looking at micro-credentials as well. And I know that I think it's Alex that's involved in a micro-credential project. Is it? Maybe it's somebody else. Actually, it's Nan Travers, isn't it? I think so, yeah. So, and we've been working with different colleagues in SUNY over the years, learning about how you package your micro-credentials and your special purpose awards as well. And that helps us understand our agenda in relation to employability. So the policy drivers, so when we were making the business case for this offering, and we, even at this stage, Bridie and I are looking at how is this whole initiative going to be sustained and embedded within our university, My Career Path. So when we look at lifelong learning participation across the EU, Ireland is quite low, and that's one of our drivers then. So when we see the EU average is about 10.5%, and the participation rate in Ireland is 7.3. We have a lot to do to encourage and get people into the institute. And so the government has set us a target of 15% by 2025. Now, where we are at the moment, we're probably at about 12. So we're actually doing okay, but we still have another couple of years to meet that. And that's where tools like My Career Path, which Bridie will talk about in a moment, are going to help drive up that target and reach our numbers. And then also you'll see other factors that are driving, there's national and international policies and strategies that are helping us, I suppose, drive higher education to reinvent and reimagine and develop structures and pathways. And this is where the whole idea of micro-credentials and I suppose innovative learning paths is coming about as well. So where all this is leading to, you know, you'll see this whole kind of enterprise perspective, which is important, and this whole drive for upskilling of the workforce. And those links between higher education and the workforce certainly are coming through very strongly in the work that Bridie is doing and the team. And the workplace environment, as we know, they have an agenda to digitally transform, just as we do in higher education. They want to seek the right people for the right jobs, and access to higher education is key. And upskilling staff at different stages of their career so that they see opportunities to excel and develop in their own particular roles. Okay, am I not close enough? Okay. So this is the Human Capital Initiative that I mentioned. And then just so you see as well, I think it's covered by the sign, but maybe people see that online. But just for everyone to see here, this just gives you an insight on the growth of our online student numbers in ATU. So there's been steady growth. Now, back in 2002, 2003, this is where Sligo began. So our Sligo campus were, I suppose, the pioneers and led out on the area of online teaching or online learning programs. And then we've seen steady growth over the years. And in particular, if we look at 2022, that's when we all merged together, when Sligo and Donegal and Galway Mayo came together and our numbers began to grow. So you'll see numbers there at 5972. I don't have the numbers at the moment for 2023, but you see strong growth there in flexible and online learning programs. And there'll be about 150 available across the ATU. So where have we, I suppose, what are we doing next in relation to driving those numbers? But more importantly, how are we promoting access to higher education and providing RPL opportunities? And this is the ATU response to that, which Bridie's going to talk about.
Okay, so thanks, Carina. So I suppose focusing on what's called the Higher Ed 4.0 project, and we received 12.4 million, which is fantastic because projects give you that space and that resource to innovate and do things differently. So you can see here the project, there's 3 key themes, and theme 1 is the one that I'm leading out on, and that was to set up a service for learners, for employees to get career guidance, to get assistance with their PLA or RPL is what we call it, and provide digital tools and a platform to help learners and support them to do this. So the second part of Theme 2 then is about developing micro-credentials, because I think most of you know, and you see the research is showing that employers really value skills. You know, the skills are so important to employers, and they want to be able to provide their employees short pieces of learning that's accredited and available to be stacked to a larger award. So that's what Theme 2 is really kind of working with industry to prepare those modules. And then the final piece is around policies, because us as a new university had to develop policies to support RPL or PLA, policies to support micro-credentials. And that was another part of our project. So they're the three kind of key elements. But we're just focusing today on the first theme one, which is the career and learning pathways, giving career guidance to help people with their course selection, which is going to help with retention, and also to an advisory service for PLA. So we developed My Career Path. Now, I must say that I'm a year and a half in this role, so it's very new. And, so we've put a lot of work in a year and a half in what we've developed, but we have a lot to go to as well. So I just want to introduce first thing around employability, because Carina just mentioned it there, and how we've linked in employability into the programme and the platform. And here I have Darcy Sewell, and they have developed a framework for employability. And as you all know, employability is not about getting a job. It's about remaining and sustaining your employability throughout your lifetime. And this particular framework we really liked, and it was from the University of Lancashire in the UK. A lot of universities have integrated it there into their programs. And that's what we've integrated the model into our My Career Path platform. So here you will see there's 5 key elements to employability that must be present, for a learner. And they're career development learning, experience, work and life, degree subject knowledge, generic skills and emotional intelligence. And, they need to get exposure to these elements, but also to be able to reflect on, and they have shown that this increases, a learner's self-confidence, self-efficacy and self-esteem. And there's a very strong correlation between that self-confidence and employability. And I just, wanted to highlight that. And as I say, the important thing is that all these elements must be present in order, for somebody to maintain their employability. And what we have done with My Career Path is, in the pathways that our learners go through, we take their employability pulse before they start their pathway, and we do it again at the end. So they're able to see where they kind of sit in terms of employability in all of these key areas. So as I say, My Career Path was developed to give career guidance to employees, people in the workplace in Ireland that don't have access to career guidance. It's impartial one-to-one career guidance and mentoring service. And we've developed personal pathways. We're using innovative tools. So when we developed this, it was just after COVID. So, it was the first time that we offered career guidance in an online forum where we were using digital tools with the expertise of guidance counsellors and also RPL coordinators. So when we started, we just mapped out what the pathway would look like. And first of all, it was very much about engaging the learner. And, in Ireland, as I say, we use RPL, recognition of prior learning, but people don't know what that means. You talk to employers and you talk to learners, and what is it? So it was about the communication around RPL. Then it was having online resources to help people in their portfolio of application. So you have to do a very complex portfolio of application in Ireland. And it was giving them support to do that. So helping them to understand, align their work experience, their, experiential learning to the learning outcomes of a program, and they were going to get more success in their applications. It was about career guidance. So we had online career assessment tools that we've built into the pathways. So again, helping people understand and get to know themselves and to get to know what really suits them best. And then what we do is we look at the courses that suit what is presented in terms of their personality profile. We also have an e-learning hub on the platform, so that if there's gaps in their learning, or if there's, unconfident around certain fundamental skills, literacy, numeracy, the transversal skills, we have lots of e-learning courses here. They're not accredited, but it's all about building their confidence before they take the next step of that learning. So then we have, as I say, the employability track. So that means then something to somebody, why I'm going back to invest in my learning and how it's going to be good for me long term. And they all develop their career program and pathway and plan with SMART goals and all the rest of it. So that's really it. This is the platform, My Career Path. So you can come on here and you can make an appointment to meet a career learning pathway advisor. Now, it's not an open platform, so you have to meet somebody first, and they will have a discussion with you to see that it is for you. And then they'll show you the platform, and then you get access to the platform and to your pathway. So how we thought we might reach people in the workplace is to develop these personas. So people could identify with the different personas. So you can see New Beginnings, Career Accelerator, Mastery Path, Dream Builder, and Entrepreneur Path. And we've, you know, these are the 5 key pathways we started with initially, but we've developed new ones as we work with industry, because they want us to work with their HR departments and their L&D departments to have maybe their own kind of stamp on the learning pathway for their employees. So we've also developed kind of bespoke pathways, but these were the key ones we started with. And you can see there's 4 key elements to your pathway. So first of all, it's starting blocks. It's looking inward. So you're doing some kind of psychometric assessments around your strengths. So we chose kind of positive assessments to help people identify their strengths and what courses they might align to. Personality, to understand their personality. So reflect on the career assessments, their learning styles, and they're supported at each stage with their career and learning pathway advisor and with their RPL coordinator. So they will meet a person online 4 times during this process. So the second phase is getting on your marks. So this is where we bring them to some of the e-learning courses on the platform. So we've identified maybe areas that might be good for them to learn more about. And so that's the second phase. The third phase then is when they're actually putting together their portfolio. So whether it's their PLA portfolio, and then they get support during that. And then finally, it's either submitting applications and they will consolidate their career development plan with their RPL coordinator and with their careers advisor. So again, when we started looking at the pathways, we looked at who they were, what they needed, what they bring to the table, and obviously what supports. So each pathway, we kind of chose different things and different assessments and a different pathway, obviously, for each persona. I'm not going to go through this now, but I have brought along some material, and obviously we can show you the pathways afterwards if you'd like to see them. But you can just see how it's broken down, and there's different tasks they have to go through and complete before they can move to the next stage. So Career Accelerator is somebody who's a recent graduate, somebody who maybe has a lot of work experience in the workplace, but now wants to go back to get their qualification. Then you have Mastery Pathway, somebody who's seeking promotion or career advancement or a job changer or looking for a new challenge. Then you have the Dream Builder. So this is somebody who's considerable achievements in their life or career, and they're now looking to go back and pursue their passions. And then finally, the Entrepreneur, an ideas person, innovator, dynamic, creative, and interested in business and a problem solver. So this is what the platform looks like. And we used a platform called Abintegro. And what we liked about this platform is that it's all the kind of material here and the programs here, it's very geared towards people in the workplace, because a lot of career development platforms are typically for younger undergraduates, where this is really geared towards people in the workplace. But we customize this, so we put our stamp on it, and you know, you've got lots of versatility here in terms of how you build your pathways. So to date, we just launched last June 2022. So we have worked with 602 learners, the majority over 300 from the workplace. So there you can see just, you know, we can log the activities. We're able to see what's the most popular activities with learners, and we're tracking, you know, obviously the outputs, those that have applied to the ATU for courses. So as you can see, 72% have applied for ATU courses. So we're able to see how it's tracking. There's on the left-hand side, you'll see the employability report, and I have another slide on that. But obviously then we have a very strong focus on transversal skills, because a lot of our employers are saying this is an area that their graduates are not very strong on. So, you know, we've built a lot of work around employability, transversal skills. Here, you'll see the kind of key elements of employability, like I mentioned earlier, and they get a very good detailed report after doing their employability pulse. And again, I can show you more detailed on that, but we're able to break it down. So for example, the transversal skills that we focus on on are the ones that are highlighted by the World Economic Forum, and that say that they look for in graduates, and they're able to score them. So if there's areas that have low scoring, we're able then to collate an online pathway to help them, build their score in that area. It's difficult to describe, but I really need to show you, the kind of pathway and what it looks like. But basically, it's very much around what we've developed is career mentorship, RPL guidance, and online resources. And we believe this is, important for people in terms of going back and re-engaging with higher education. And I think it's interesting what's happening with SUNY, and that recent announcement around PLA from your Chancellor. And I suppose looking at the cohort that's out there now that you're trying to get back, that have some learning, but they don't have a degree or they don't have certification. So it's a really good way of bringing people back in, building their confidence to go back in and engage with higher education. So here's some of the outputs that they get. So on the left-hand side, you can see the strengths profile. It's really nice. It gives you an output in terms of looking at your realized strengths that you have and you use, your unrealized strengths. These are strengths you may not know you have. Your learned behaviors, those things that you thought were your strengths, but they actually de-energize you, and then your weaknesses. So again, you can just see some of the outputs that they get along the way of their journey. It takes 6 to 8 weeks to complete it. At the moment, we're looking for accreditation. So we'll have 5 credits aligned to each of the pathways. But at the moment, they get a certificate. So, really the advantages for the employees is giving that second chance at reskilling or upskilling or re-engaging with higher education. They get guided support through the process. There's RPL information, a structured program with a careers advisor to help motivate them and keep them going. And a lot of the, evaluations that we got back really, I think, a very strong kind of point for the program is the one-to-one guidance they get with the guidance counsellors. So for employers, it's very much around, in Ireland, it's, they have to develop and upskill their employees. They know that to remain sustainable in their business. So there's a big push for employers to do that with their employees. So I think this is a good way of getting people engaging with learning, because the OECD report recently has highlighted that 34% of employees are not engaged in any learning. So, it's to kind of address that to keep businesses viable into the future. So lots of advantages there for employers. Here are some of the companies that we've worked with our pilots. So we're very strong on medtech in Ireland and in our region. So we kind of looked out at who was in our region. So Medtronic, Merit Medical, Regeneron, Cyro, really kind of strong organizations with very qualified employees. So that was really interesting, those pilots. And we got very good information in terms of the micro-credential courses they were looking for, but also, how we can build it. So you can see Abbott, Meisner, Coffee, AbbVie. So we've worked with their employees. And again, it was really interesting too, because we got an open door into the companies and engaging with their employees. So it's a really nice way of transferring people back to our university and to our courses. We've also worked with further education, because maybe that's the same as your community colleges. So higher education and further education. So we have programs to help bring some of their graduates from further ed into higher ed. So we had a couple of programs. We're also starting a pilot with SUNY, and Meg, very graciously gave us good contacts with people there that was interested. And Anita Brown is going to pilot. At the moment, she has access to the platform. We're copying over a specific pathway, to use with some of the learners, just to see what that output would look like. I was just going to play a video, and I'm not sure if it's working here, but I think John is going to play it for us. I think.
No, we can play it.
Is it working? Okay, all right.
Hang on. We just have to share it on another screen. Where is the video?
Go back to your presentation, because you're in a browser already. So go
Okay.
back here. Here.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sharing this screen. Yeah.
And then press share,
Share.
and then,
I just go
Press
stop
escape.
presenting.
yeah, to stop, no, don't stop share, but let's escape out of this.
Stop share.
I'll try that. Oh, We are in, oh, there.
Oh, yeah.
And then
It's one of these,
it's
isn't
that
it?
one right there.
That one.
Yeah.
Okay, so I go back in here to Zoom. And then share. And where is it? Here it is.
And share.
We need share sound. Yeah, it's
Yep,
done.
share sound.
Share.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, do you want to introduce that before we press play?
Yeah, that's fine. It's just a short video from one of the learners from Merit Medical. She worked on the production line, and since doing my career path, she got promoted. Okay, all right.
Sorry, you say that again.
Yeah, no, this is just a short video from one of the learners. We've had really good, as I say, evaluations and response back from learners. This is one that she worked in the production line in Merit Medical, their medical device company. And after doing my career path, she got promoted and came back to re-engage with the course. And she just kind of speaks briefly about it here.
My name is Melissa. I'm currently a technician in Merit Medical, working in the projects and engineering departments. I was recommended to do my career path.ie by HR as I wanted to further my education and I wasn't sure what course to do or what route to take in order to get my degree. I think it's a great program and it really helps people to figure out their goals in life, what career they want to have, and just figure out their strengths and weaknesses and help build a CV. Working with my mentor online was a fantastic experience. She was so knowledgeable and helpful and was able to do all this online, and you just booked a slot and it just fitted around my hectic schedule. The e-learning resources were really good, and taking different career assessments and quizzes, I found out a lot of things about myself that I was unaware of, and it really helped me to work through my weaknesses. The CV 360 tool was also so easy to use and produced a really professional looking CV.
So we're just going back in here now again, is it?
Oh.
Just to go back.
Come out of that. Okay, let's stop sharing. And we share again. And we're going to share this. Oh, sorry, not that one. Where's our slide gone again?
To this one.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So you're in a browser.
That's
Go ahead
right.
and share.
Share, but we'll pick something
And
else.
then-
Tablet is coming up now, yeah.
Yeah,
And
will
then
we go
your-
back to the
it's right
slide?
there, yeah. If you want to get rid of this, press those three buttons.
How do we get rid of
right there.
him?
See those three little buttons above? Yeah, and then high floating meeting,
Oh, good.
and then
Okay.
here's your slides.
This is our slides. No?
Nope, that one. Nope, 18.
18.
Yep.
Oh, yeah,
Oh,
no,
yeah.
that's not the slide.
So maybe it's here. Nope, where'd that go? Nope, here?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Three buttons, present.
All right then. Okay, quickly doing that. As I say, we highlighted that there's a large proportion of people who did the pathways that transfer to apply for courses within the university, all rated highly the online element and their interaction with their personal mentors. So this was the case study we did with Medtronic. So we linked into their HR department and the learning and development, and they sponsor their employees to come back and do education. So we went in before they had to apply for that. So say the first stage was kind of working with the HR department to see what they needed. And then we kind of brought the employees through the 4-stage process, and it was very successful. Here is just some of the testimonials from the learners, but also from the L&D HR department. So they said the combination of e-learning tools and career assessments with the personalized advice provided by the career learning pathway advisors is second to none. But also here we had Laura O'Donoghue, who was a managing director, and she also did the program with her team. And it was really strong in terms of building up the motivation and, kind of the various kind of learning within her team. So Carina, I'm just going to pass over, to the...
So we thought, we're halfway through or nearly over halfway through, but we did want to use the opportunity to capture your experiences as well. And we do have a Padlet board in the chat. So, and we can leave that Padlet board live as we're finishing, as we're moving along with the presentation. But this link, that was shared with John? Yeah. So in this Padlet board, we have some questions. And if you look at the first question, what has worked well or what has not worked so well, we're just interested to learn from your experiences of working with industry and working with employers, what has worked well in the States. And you might just add to, do you all familiar with Padlet? You just add to the stream, and then of course. So, and another question, we're interested, you know, maybe something that has not worked so well and lessons learned from that. And we're going to come back to other questions as well. So I'll just give you a few moments if you want to go in and just add to the board, and we can show the board in a moment. Give people a chance. Yeah, I'll bring the live board up. Yeah.
It's just one of those links.
It's this one, isn't it?
There you go.
I'll just get rid of this thing. Hide
Hide
floating.
floating.
Okay. And we'll just refresh this. So this is for everybody online and for anybody in the room. Just the first question there, what has worked well for you in relation to liaising?
Question maybe for folks here first is who has experience with prior learning assessment at your institution?
Yeah.
We have to go back, I think.
Okay.
to the first question, and see if you do.
Yeah.
Do raise your hand. You have some experience. So, Meg, you want to talk? No. So one of the challenges here in SUNY, we're in a room with instructional designers.
Alex, we'll need you to get closer to the microphone, please.
Sorry. Is there anything in the chat, John, that of anyone who might have some experiences with prior learning assessment? Because I think one of the challenges here in SUNY, aside from Empire State College and Nan Travers and some of the work that you all have done, I think our experiences are rather limited. Would you say that's true? Community colleges, there you go, right? Okay. So yeah, I mean, let's leave the Padlet open, and
Yeah.
if anyone in the virtual session has anything they'd like to add to the Padlet, and anyone here in the room, that'll be open for us.
Absolutely. And the Padlet board is live, and we've different questions to, I suppose, capture. I suppose one of the important questions that we might get you to add to towards the end of the session is looking at the feedback from the My Career Path model. And maybe there is learning development pathways you have been involved with, or we're interested in your views of what you might think of the My Career Path, or how it might work with your existing community of okay. Yeah, just be interested to see what you think and your approach. So literally use the plus sign, and we'll come back to the Padlet in a few moments. At least it's live online. And if some of the questions don't apply, just ignore them. That's fine. And we'll go back to
No, the next one.
this one.
That
This
no.
one.
Yeah.
This is it. Yeah. Okay. So full screen again. Present. Now.
You're on next.
Oh yeah, okay. So part of the package and part of the whole My Career Path experience or learning pathway, we developed quite a number of years ago, actually back in 2013, was an information website or a marketing information site to help candidates interested in looking at RPL assessment and how they might go about that. And in particular, our focus back then was to develop an e-portfolio assessment tool built in the Moodle environment to actually support candidates navigate and build evidence within this environment so they could submit it for assessment and naturally gain access to a higher education course. So that journey has taken off over the years. So when we first started back in 2013, we were looking what was needed within the sector. But what we have realized over the last 10 years is that it's actual multiple voices are needed and lots of partners in this space around the world to actually drive the agenda, because there is challenges in managing RPL and accepting it as a mechanism for access to higher ed. So we've kind of joined forces with lots of great colleagues now, no more than SUNY that we've mentioned, but also Thompson Rivers University have come on board, and lots of different work groups work group meetings we've established. We've been exploring the whole area of competency-based assessment and aligning it to our, I suppose, our national framework of qualifications. We've been looking and working with CALE. More recently, we got to go to the CALE conference in Chicago, and that was very interesting because we met practitioners from all over the country that were dealing with this whole RPL agenda. We're also very involved with a national project in RPL called, and you can look this up, it's priorlearning.ie. So there's a huge national drive around recognizing prior learning, and there's I suppose a very strong agenda for our higher education institutes and our registrars to recognize and provide mechanisms for candidates to come into our institutes, and very closely with SETU and University of SETU. I suppose they're as old as we are. They came about just after we became Atlantic Technological University, and SETU is where Meg did her Fulbright scholarship, our Fulbright Award experience a number of years ago. So that's Waterford Institute of Technology and Carlow. So they have formed to become SETU. So together and collectively, and we've been looking at this whole area of competency-based rubric assessment and building out from the original My Experience Moodle assessment tool and moving more into a Microsoft Dynamics system, and how can that be more intuitive and work with our learners. So we're all learning from each other, and I suppose that's the important thing. So we started and we began with this My Experience RPL tool, and you'll be able to see that website. It's myexperience.ie. In the back end of that, there's a link which is still live, of course. It's that Moodle system, as I mentioned. But as we've moved and as we've gained this higher education human capital initiative investment, there's been a huge focus on the digital transformation element, and how can we, I suppose, provide a system that is more, it has that kind of customer relationship management system built in. It will follow the user more closely throughout their journey in higher ed. It'll link in the My Career Path, and all of these factors. We wanted all of these apps to kind of merge and become more intelligent, that will help us develop and manage that candidate more effectively going forward. So there's been lots of investment in different areas, as I said there. This is the site when you go into it at the moment, and it's actually even going through another enhancement phase in the next 5 weeks. It'll have a new skin on it again. And that's in response to the feedback that we're getting from employers through engagement with My Career Path, but also looking at this information space, how we're going to communicate RPL more effectively. We do have 3 RPL coordinators in place. So similar to what Bridie mentioned in the My Career Path, Career and Learning Pathway Advisors, the RPL coordinators are linked into the My Career Path system, and they're booking and meeting candidates as well. But their priority is to focus, are they relevant to the e-portfolio assessment tool? Would they be, or do they need, I suppose, further supports from the micro courses that are in My Career Path, or perhaps they need to do some bridging courses in order to leap a bit forward into the accessing our higher education programs. So there's quite a lot here in relation to the different, I suppose, the companies that we're working with. And Bridie, you'll say a bit about that.
Yeah, I know it's a really busy slide, but I suppose just to say, you know, there's 2 projects working in terms of RPL. So we have the higher ed project and the national project. So really a focus is very much around communication. So we developed a communication plan for the next couple of years. As we said, the awareness around RPL isn't very strong. The other thing, we are engaging, you know, with industry, and we're having specific good examples and good case studies. So here you can see Optum, RPS, Boston Scientific and Medtronic. So we're able to kind of highlight and showcase these really good workings of how we can work with industry, RPL candidates into programs within our university, and, you know, have those pathways and systems in place. We are, as I say, developing new digital tools and digital badges around helping, I suppose, academics work with RPL and understand RPL and assess RPL appropriately and build the systems within that. And then finally, it's My Career Path. It's using the Career and Learning Pathway Advisors with the RPL coordinators to look at new innovative ways of developing that e-portfolio for RPL assessment. So they're the kind of key things around that, just very briefly.
Okay. And where's it gone again? Okay, so just I'll just get rid of that bar there. Pull it back up. High floating. Okay, so how we've responded. I've mentioned we have developed a work group where colleagues have been meeting regularly across the sector, and interestingly, we're looking at Oscar as well to help guide how we structure this RPL assessment area. And because we're moving out of the Moodle environment and going into a new territory of looking at the Microsoft Dynamics type database build system, we have to think a little bit differently on how we, I suppose, bring the learner through the journey of building their portfolio. So and then we have to also comply with quality and award standards and how we go about assessing candidates. So part of, and I suppose this really is only a snapshot of a spreadsheet that we started building with the work group, looking at our national framework of qualifications and then aligning them to these competencies. So where Bridie talked about all these competencies and transversal skills that are peppered throughout my career path platform, and learners clearly understand that type of language. But when they come in traditionally to get RPL assessed within our institutes, they will be presented with learning outcomes and program learning outcomes. And in some ways that's double Dutch to a lot of candidates. So what we're trying to do is look at a way to help our educators that are assessing the candidates, but also to help our RPL candidates coming into the system, that they see a bit of plain English and simplicity around the words and the evidence that they need to provide in their portfolio. So when we talk about communication skills, we're making it more explicit and we're showing a kind of a mapping tool. Now, I don't have that here to show you today, but I suppose we're telling you about the workings that are going on in the background in relation to the mapping element. So that's been a really interesting process. We have had opposition from some of the registrars within the sector would not be familiar with this type of assessment. And but interestingly, through the program boards or program board members that we've involved, the different faculties, they're very interested in piloting and trialing this. So we're looking forward, and maybe it'll be this time, probably in another 6 months, I was going to say this time next year, we'll have lots of screenshots to show how this system is being built and how it's working. And it's great to have colleagues from SUNY that are in our work group as well. And I'll just move forward. It's moving forward, is it? Okay, we'll try it again. Okay, so I think we're coming towards the end now. So there's benefits here. I'll let you.
Okay.
Right.
So yeah, this is the last slide to be glad. So just in terms of enterprise, you know, employees are getting recognition for, especially for their experiential learning, their training and the skills they've developed in the workplace. It's fast tracking employees, you know, into courses and giving them exemptions, etc. Developing career plans, a better return on investment for employers when they are supporting their employees to go back in to do, whether it's a degree or a master's. Improved engagement. You know, we even work with them in terms of their current role and how they can, you know, develop their transversal skills in their current role. So that's better engagement as well for enterprise. And I suppose always promoting the value of RPL in the workplace. For employees, with our new platform, they get access to all of this 24/7. You know, when their busy lives, it's when they're able to do it. They get one-to-one mentoring from the coordinators. They have increased self-awareness and motivation, and our assessment and evaluations would show that from the learners who've already been through. They identify their skills and their competencies. What does that mean? And just like what Carina has shown there, how that all links up, you know, and the ease of the application process. At the moment, it's very complex and the portfolio of evidence is very complex. So we need to help them with that and appreciate the value of recognition of prior learning. And then finally, for a university, we've developed routes to engage with industry into higher education, developed user-friendly RPL process and systems, increased numbers enrolling, enterprise partnerships, which have a knock-on effect across the university. And then, as I say, finally, greater awareness of RPL, which is really important.
Okay. And oh yeah, it comes back to our Padlet board. So we do have questions sitting on the Padlet board, and some of them might be relevant to the group here today, but we'd certainly love any feedback. You can engage with the Padlet board, and we have some questions around how do we make higher education more accessible, And maybe, and I think Meg is going to come in and ask us lots of questions. I see her walking towards us. So we're happy to take any questions. And it's very exciting about the work that's happening with the pilot as well with SUNY, which will give an opportunity for perhaps this community to dive in and experience what's happening. So
There are questions from the online audience.
come out of this, and we're going to the chat. Oh, I see questions. Okay. What does RPL stand for? So
That's cute.
okay. So RPL stands for Recognized Prior Learning, which is equivalent to what you call PLA. Yeah, prior learning. So, and you know, I'm glad you asked that question because it's interesting. The national project that has been driving this development of RPL policies in our universities, they launched their website and it's called Prior Learning, but interestingly, it's not really catering for it's catering for us as educators, but not necessarily for candidates that might be considering, because there can be a misunderstanding as to what RPL actually means if it's not widely promoted, you know, by government and through information campaigns.
I can't figure out the
Okay,
chat.
sorry.
But John,
I
are
can
there
do
any
it.
questions?
I can do it.
Yeah, Alex, there are questions from the online audience.
I can't hear.
So
Alex, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, so the first question is, are school leavers equivalent to high school dropouts in the US or high school graduates?
Yes, I think yes is the answer.
Well, there wouldn't be dropouts.
New leavers, they're equivalent to.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't call them dropouts, but I would call maybe, yeah, I suppose the school leavers are those that are completing their leaving certificate. So that's the last, what do you call it in the States when?
Graduating?
Yeah, they're graduating from high school. So what do you call that state? They do a state exam here when you graduate from high school. And those, they're 18 years old and they're students that complete our central application system and they choose a college and course that they want to attend. So yeah.
I was just going to add to that, just, you know, when you say it about dropouts, actually, I don't like that word, but anyway, but we've developed a Strengths Path program specifically for disengaged youth. So people who might have dropped out from education. And again, it's a really cool, we've gamified this online program and we use the Strengths profile. And again, I can show it to any of you here in the room if you did want to see it afterwards, but it's really, really good. So just to add that in.
Yeah. And, but I suppose
Thank you.
that's another cohort for targeting for my career path. But okay.
So I have two more questions.
Yeah.
Can students earn credit for career learning e-portfolio courses, regardless of whether their evidence could be mapped to courses or programs?
At the moment, we don't have a credit. Candidates do not get credits for completing an e-portfolio. The e-portfolio is, I suppose, an assessment tool that's presented for access. So you would get access or advanced entry to a program as a result of completing an e-portfolio of evidence. But it is something we are pushing to give credit for that portfolio. And in order for us to do that, we have to put in place, let's say, a 5-credit module where the candidates sign up to that module as such, or that micro credential. And that micro credential might be building an e-portfolio for RPL assessment. And that's a way of them getting credits. But at the moment, it's something like standalone. They get a badge and a certificate of engagement with the My Career Path. But as Bridie mentioned earlier, there is, we are looking at credit bearing routes, and it just has to go through our quality system to ensure that we can put that in place. Is that okay?
Thank you. Thank you. This is the last one I have from the online audience, unless I missed something, folks. If I have, re-enter your question in the chat, but this should be the last one. Can you talk more about how transversal skills are assessed? What's the psychometric background?
Okay, so actually, the tool that we use, it's called the Career Edge Plus tool, and it was developed by Abintegro, the software system that we use. And the candidates or learners, they actually self-assess themselves. So there's a series of questions, and they self-assess themselves in terms of the transversal skills. And as I say, they do that at the beginning of the program and at the end. So it is around self-assessment, but we have built, as I say, a learning program using the e-learning courses around transversal skills on the platform. And again, this has been developed by Abintegro, so we worked with them in terms of doing that. So I'm not sure if that answers your question there. Is that okay?
Don, did that answer your question? You can just put something in the chat. Yes, he says yes, it did. Okay. Thank you. Sure. Alex, if there's questions from the room, we cannot hear them.
Can you try this one? I'm sorry, that one doesn't seem
Meg Benke here. Just one of the things that really impressed me about this project is somebody who's worked in the PLA business, for quite a long time at Empire State College. When you look at some of the statistics they have here, 72% of the students in the program actually go on and take courses. I mean, for an employer, somebody back here at this back table worked in continuing education. I mean, getting this kind of participation from a corporate sponsor program is a pretty high participation rate. But you also had, what percentage of the students did PLA of your learners?
Yeah, I don't have the percentage, but it was lower. So it would actually be less.
But
than
it was pretty
50%.
high number though.
Yeah, I think it was like 47%.
47% of these students did PLA, which I think is quite impressive because of two different things, is the combination of using the AI type tools to do the career assessment, but the high personalization of the coaching model, where really it's a real good combination of doing that. Any questions or comments from the room? Yeah, back here.
I just wanted to comment that I think it's remarkable the work that you're doing, and I hope you're not disappointed in us that the Padlet didn't get filled up. As I was seeing it not get filled up, one of the things I was thinking about is how diffuse all of the things that you are doing are around the SUNY system, where we have had a resolution on prior learning assessment, and with something we need to get started on. And we do have a focus on micro-credentials, and we do have a focus on online learning, but it's often completely different offices that deal with these things. And so like my office isn't involved with them, our micro-credential task force, but that's what's integrated into your program. And my office would not, our continuing ed office would deal with prior learning assessment. It's not all of us don't have that single structure. So it's not like out of a lack of interest or anything, because I think it's quite remarkable the work that you're doing. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Meg, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, they talked about a collaboration with SUNY, and I'm wondering, what is our collaboration together?
Bridie's offered to have Empire State College be a participant and use the platform with an employer to test out its viability, because this is a demonstration research project with employers. So the idea, Bridie talked about this at the end, that they have to be able to prove that this program can be picked up and replicated elsewhere.
So I hope next year for the summit, someone from ESC will come and report on that project, because that sounds incredibly interesting. And I still want to figure out how to get my kid to do that.
Anybody else in the room? Kim. I am a jogger, but you are.
Yeah. SUNY just updated its policy on prior learning assessment. And so has I think renewed the conversation around the system about what those opportunities are, and, more campuses kind of trying to think about this. And I'm just wondering, you all are very far down the path and doing tremendous work. I'm just wondering what advice you would give for any of our campuses who are here who might want to think about doing a little bit more in this space. Like where would they, what would they think about first, or like what are some easy ways to get started?
Well, I suppose to start, it's all about collaboration. So the route to success is to bring in the key players. Now, it's interesting when you mentioned that different areas manage different things. And maybe it's the culture of how we work in higher ed in Ireland. But we need to literally set up work groups and task forces that have representation across the different functions. And what I have found from experience is that's where you get to success. If you have some of those key advocates at the table and you bring them with you to work on the initiative, whether it's designing the proposal from the beginning as to how you're going to approach it, but then also when it comes down to implementation, that everyone has ownership of a piece of the puzzle or the work package. So collectively you're building it together, but that you have all agreed on the plan. So it is a case of sharing and maybe stepping outside your existing comfort zone or the areas that you traditionally work in, and being willing to collaborate more and set up those forums to do that. And I think that's the key part, and recognizing it is a partnership approach, because unfortunately we can't do something in isolation within one particular unit. So that's just one approach. But then in relation to the technology, you have to do research. And I know Bridie did a lot of scoping as to what platform would be suitable. So that's where you bring in the demonstration. And I suppose you can see the potential of this type of platform, and you can learn from the pilot experience to see how could that integrate into the SUNY system, and how
The 12 million euros didn't hurt either, right?
Yeah, well, and this part is 4 million. Yeah, a lot of the money is going into the other part as well. Yeah.
And a lot of like the platform doesn't cost a lot. I think the money was in terms of recruiting. The first thing I had to do was recruit 8 people onto a team. And as I say, this was only a year and a half ago. So yeah, that's where a lot of the money is going, really, is on the human resources. And of course, that's the big challenge now, because we're asked, well, how is this going to be sustained? And then we have to show how we can wash our face, so that how, transferring people into our courses, and how that can generate money. But I think what's interesting with industry, we just noticed by doing my career path, they want to develop the micro credentials. So we're getting that intelligence, but also it's allowing us to get a captive audience within a company and, translate that into learners within the university.
So 72% of the people who did the pathways went on to take classes, right?
Yeah, applied. Intended or applied. So as I say, because we're very early stages, we have to follow those numbers to see how many actually, come onto a program. But I think the really nice thing about the pilot, it gives you the opportunity to test things, to develop things. We couldn't have done that if we didn't have the resources, or the fact it was a pilot, and it gave an opportunity that we weren't in silos, because now we could collaborate with the instructional designers, with industry, with the various parties, whereas we couldn't have done that in the traditional system that existed.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think that is for our campuses to think about who would that be? What would that team look like? So thank you very much.
I have another question from online, Alex.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
What do you say to employers who are worried that they'll lose employees who have been RPL'd and trained? Also, do you have any small employers in the system? Harder for them? No.
I mean, that's the first question that employers will say, because the retention, they don't want to lose their employees. So that is asked all the time. But I suppose with the pilot, we started off working with the larger employers that don't like their employees don't tend to move, but they still want them to have that open mindset to learning and developing. So it's part of their culture. So yeah, that is interesting. But how we present it, to the employer is, this is about developing your employees so they're more effective in their role. And that has been really the output in terms of developing their self-confidence, but also looking at how they develop their transversal skills within their current role. So the careers experts work with that learner to help them look at the opportunities that are around them in their day-to-day role. So we kind of present it that way, but you're right. That's the first question we're asked when we're engaging with employers. Are we going to lose people by doing this? So as I say, you know, we focused on the larger employers that weren't as concerned about that. And it's interesting what you say about the smaller employers. Like that's the next stage that we're moving to now is kind of working with those, because they don't have HR departments. They could really, and they have more challenges in terms of keeping their talent, but also they need to develop their talent if they're going to stay, you know, kind of relevant in the next 20, 30 years.
Thank you.
Any other questions in the room? Yes.
Just going back to the the human capital side, how many of the advisors did you have, and like what's an advisor load for these coaching aspect of the program?
So we have 3 career learning pathway advisors, and we have 3 RPL coordinators. So the 3 career learning pathway advisors, as I say, we launched in June last year. So they have done 1,200 one-to-one sessions with learners, just to give you an idea. So, but yeah, it's interesting. It's online, you know, they have 4 30-minute kind of one-to-one sessions. And it's something very different. We haven't done that before, you know, and it's worked really well, you know. So, but that would have been what they've done to date, 1,100. And that's not including the RPL coordinators now. I don't have that figure, but it'll just give you an idea of the 3, what kind of interaction they've had.
And what's also interesting about that is, you know, Bridie comes from the career counseling profession, you know, more from that side of the world, and moving that career counseling to before people are actually students is not something that we as universities, I don't think, have traditionally done. You know, starting at, you know, we do it at student orientation, but not before, when they're prospects, as far as I know.
I'd like to thank Bridie and Carina for coming all this way to share with us your wonderful work, and thank you. Thanks.